Here I come.
Oh.
Here I come.
From the first minutes of this movie, I felt everything inside me shrinking. Tears were about to come. But at the same time, laughter burst out, and a strange mixture of relief and despair occurred in my head. And suddenly, you realize, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood turned out to be much deeper than we expected. Although many people called it a failure. In fact, someone sincerely doesn't understand why Margot Robbie is here. After all, she does almost nothing on the screen, and some are delighted with the atmosphere of old Hollywood. But if you dig deeper, it's clear that Quentin had a clear idea, and I want to bring together all the meanings, subtexts, and cultural references hidden in every scene. In this video, we're going to figure out why it wasn't important to kick Bruce Lee's ass, why Tarantino puts a lot of meaning into Cliff Booth's last words, and what the real-life tragedy of the Manson family has to do with it all. Let's dive into the era of the 60s, where hippies were still peacefully walking barefoot on the streets. TV was broadcasting simple westerns, and the nightmare that changed the face of Hollywood forever was looming on the doorstep. I want to make an analysis that will work for any viewer, so it's important to voice some basic things. This is a movie about the era of the 60s. Quentin Tarantino is the premier movie nerd on this planet who spent his entire youth in movie theaters and grew up in love with the screen. We've seen this in his signature moves and genre references. But in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for the first time, the director turns to a historical period that is important to him on a personal level. Here, the protagonist is not a specific character, but rather the year 1969 itself, and the atmosphere of a bygone era. To demonstrate it, the movie makes several decisions at once. To shoot any subject on camera, first of all, you need to determine how much extra stuff will fit in the frame. Do you want to see the environment, context, or just one character and his emotions? That difference is technically measured by the width of the lens angle. So, when you want to make a movie about an epoch, you need to take the widest angle and try to frame all street shots in such a way that there is a maximum of unnecessary things, that is, a lot of context. Cars, streets, signs. The character moves not just on the pavement, but through a layer of 60s culture. And he moves not in silence, but with the sounds of the time. Notice the amount of seemingly unnecessary and unimportant sound information embedded in the movie. Even the usual B-rolls work for the general idea here. For example, the nightfall scene gives not only information about the change of time of day, but also creates a nostalgic mood by showing how neon signs begin to illuminate Hollywood. It's not just the era as a whole, but a specific aspect of it. The TV shows, the Playboy Mansion, and the real-life personalities who used to set the tone for the entire industry. And of course, for a spectacular immersion, Tarantino uses a stylization of the 60s aesthetic, distinctive angles, rough camera work, and editing that recall classic TV series and westerns of the era. Now that the historical set is ready, it's time to meet the protagonists of the movie. Through them, Tarantino reveals key themes and messages, trying to share with us respect, admiration, and genuine love for the ethical archetypes of this time. Cliff Booth's image is just absolute awesomeness. Minutes spent in his company energize the viewer with confidence and calm. The brutal Cliff, with a slight hint of philosopher, breathes quiet strength and charisma on screen. In this movie, he has a superpower that every man on the planet dreams of.
Want me to suck your cock while driving?
Given Tarantino's love of women, which he carries throughout his entire career, I will assume that being able to resist young legs dancing on the curve is some sort of ultimate human power that Tarantino envisions. So, where does the coolest and most omnipotent character in the movie live? The stuntman lives behind the movie screen. Poor, not getting any media attention, probably not highly intelligent, not complaining, existing on his own beat and steady zen, and the one who does all the hard stuff. A stuntman in the 60s is not the same as today, when even an arm can be made more straight in post-production to make it look cooler. I guess I don't need to explain that a stuntman back then had to do everything that is done by graphics today. And it was the stuntman who provided emotion, cool stunts, and effects to the viewer. And also success, attention, and love for these guys. Yes, you can look at Dalton as an alcoholic, as a loser, whose fame is going down the drain, and that's certainly true. Dalton is the average star of those years, with all the usual milestones Quentin puts into his destiny. Great success in one single character, gradual shift to the antagonist, who is defeated by a younger and cooler guy, and then only third-rate European roles, followed by the final oblivion. But behind this biography lies an image of a creative man, which Tarantino is thrilled with. Deep reflection, a tremendous amount of fear.
Rick fucking Dalton.
But most importantly, a constant attempt with every role to prove himself and everyone around him that he is not a piece of shit. The main symbol of this problem is the fact that Dalton wants to meet Polanski from the very beginning of the movie. The character of Polanski carries two meanings at the same time. To star with Polanski, that is to enter the immortal pantheon of recognized classics. On the other hand, Polanski represents the new Hollywood with deeper problems and psychological plots, which do not exist in Westerns. And Dalton, as a deep personality, sees this as an opportunity for self-improvement. In Quentin Tarantino's script, there is no condemnation of this character. Scenes of Dalton suffering are intercuts with Sharon going to the movies and not being bothered at all. They show us that, yes, she's also genuinely trying. She's a natural-born actor too, but in a different way. She's a pure extrovert. She demands attention for herself and is absolutely happy that the people in the hall are just laughing.
I'm free.
Notice that Dalton has no interaction with the audience at all during the movie. He is immersed in self-reflection in internal problems, while Tate, on the contrary, is simple and superficial, but able to make people laugh and therefore happy. And she is not just a nice person. On the contrary, she is even more charming. To create Tate's image, Tarantino consulted with relatives of the real Sharon, who noted how accurately they managed to convey her cheerfulness and openness. This enhances the contrast with the gloomy background of the era. Tarantino shows the characters as archetypes of the 60s and finds a reason to love these people endlessly. It's a love for the era and the stars of the time. Well, almost all the stars. This is a very important and cool semantic scene because Quentin shows his creative method. This is a movie, and he's free to do whatever he thinks is right. For example, kicking Bruce Lee's ass in his movie. After all, we're in Hollywood. Interestingly, the scene with Bruce Lee is still controversial among fans of the actor and martial arts. Some consider it offensive, and others see it as a typical Tarantino's game with reality, where iconic personalities get into an alternative version of history. Okay, I think we finally set the stage. It's a specific period of Hollywood. We've created characters who are essentially about that period and are narrating through their own archetypes. We told a couple of jokes about the hippies, about the invincible Bruce Lee. But in every scenario, there has to be conflict. And that's where a lot of people broke down when watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. They say that nothing happens in the movie. The characters don't resolve any conflict. And the plot doesn't move anywhere. It's true and false at the same time. Have you noticed that this is the first time in all movies that the director is so openly mocking the audience? Like Tarantino knows we're here to watch Tarantino. A decade ago, only cinephiles discussed his obsession with women's legs. And in this movie, he openly trolls those cinephiles by shoving legs right in their faces all the time. Whenever appropriate and inappropriate. Or the same thing that made up cigarette brands that unite all his movies into a universe. It was almost impossible to notice before, but now he shows it to every viewer in the most obvious way. Look how interesting it turns out. The movie is playing with us, with the viewers. It knows our expectations, and it gives us this shot almost at the very beginning. What kind of fucking horror movie is this? It's playing with the audience because the audience knows, or should know, that the movie is preparing them for the murder of Sharon Tate. It is important to realize that this is not the first time Tarantino has rewritten history in his movies. In *Inglourious Basterds*, he provides a fictional World War II outcome, and here he changes the tragic ending of Sharon Tate's destiny. It's part of his auteur signature, where reality gives way to cinematic justice. The first information that popped up about the new Tarantino movie was, it's a movie about the murder of Roman Polanski's wife, played by Margot Robbie. It happened on August 8, 1969. The Manson gang broke into Roman Polanski's house and killed 5 people, including Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant. Among the victims were Tate's close friends, including stylist Jay Sebring and coffee empire heiress Abigail Folger. And if you haven't dived into the details, it's physically difficult to even read the Wikipedia article on this nightmare. The 60s were a happy time, with barefoot hippies walking the streets, naive cowboy shows on TV, and fun music playing. Then, this nightmare happened. Suddenly, the symbol of kindness, that sweet little girl, turns out to be a bloodthirsty, ruthless, brainwashed killer who can stab a pregnant woman 16 times. And the most important thing is that none of this should have happened. Because, as it turned out later, they weren't even the people who should have been assassinated. It's a big mistake and a total hell. On TV, Manson's personality was mystified. All the members of his club justified him and vindicated him, ready to accept any guilt in order to protect their favorite enlightened god. There was an important quote about Manson, that he killed the 60s, and that the 60s ended with the murder of Sharon Tate. So, if you don't know this information, you won't understand why the first hippie appearance is a total horror flick, and you won't see these visual hints that create tension throughout the movie. And the appearance of this mysterious guest will not be fully realized by the average viewer. Nor will this scene work to the fullest extent. Actually, Cliff on the Farm is a separate movie within a movie, but while the average viewer only senses something wrong due to the music, staging, and atmosphere in general, those immersed in the context expect absolutely everything. After all, they know that there is a future killer around the fictional Cliff right now, and anything can happen to him. If you think about it, Tarantino, with his cinephile references, has always made metafilms. That is, movies that assume you know a certain context. But recognizing those references wasn't necessary, and the movies always remained complete for the casual viewer. Just unusual and freaky. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a much more risky experiment, because without context, the movie stops working. The plot of the movie is absent. The audience has no clear understanding of what Rick Dalton is doing and why, where he is going, what his obstacle is, what role Sharon Tate plays in this, who returns to the plot again and again for some reason. Roughly speaking, all the rules have been followed. Dalton is trying to cling to the remnants of former glory, while Cliff is promoting a storyline of ominous hippies. But a lot of people felt as if it wasn't enough, and there was no plot. And that's the point. Only when we have complete and sufficient information, we are tensed from the very beginning to the very end. All interest is built on the fact that the audience knows spoilers. The driving force behind the movie is anticipation. Just like a movie, John dies at the end. The director eliminates unnecessary crap like plot constructions and directly communicates with the audience's expectations. We know Rick Dalton lives not far from the Polanski family. We know where the story is going. We know that a fun and relaxed movie will collapse and turn into a bloody inferno. And every time we see a rejoicing Sharon Tate, a sad realization plays in our subconsciousness of how it's all about to end. To get the association settled in our heads, Quentin uses this scene. Margot Robbie plays Sharon Tate, who is watching a movie called Sharon Tate, a movie with a real Sharon Tate in it. It breaks the visual logic of the movie. I've even seen people in the comments who didn't realize who she was looking at, as if it wasn't herself. But Quentin intentionally breaks the integrity to tie the events of the movie more tightly to reality. By this direction juxtaposition, he connects the actress and the real person in a unified space. It seems as if he is imposing on us the idea, look, there she is. This is the woman who died in the massacre. Do you see that the movie ceases to work without spoilers? Roughly speaking, when we ask what the plot is for the protagonist, we need to remind ourselves that the protagonist is the 60s, and the plot is about how the 60s died. But, wait a second. We're not in the real 60s. Damn it, we're in Hollywood. Notice how the acid cigarette comes out of nowhere? And it doesn't really play any role? I mean, why would it? Cliff just does a couple of funny things and a couple of remarks.
I know all three of you.
But without it, he would still kick the bandits' asses. There should be even more questions for Cigarette than for Sharon Tate. The thing is, the cigarette and the acid trip is a symbol of the conditional Twilight Zone, the entrance to the space of imagination. It is important for Tarantino to build a clear and very artificial boundary, so the cigarette pops out like a jack-in-the-box explained in a deliberately goofy way. Cliff lights it and goes over the horizon, and the Manson gang arrives from the same place. It's a smooth transition into the storytelling part of what's going on. Let's listen to what the hippies are talking about in this scene.
We kill the people who taught us to kill.
Great trolling has happened. Quentin makes them say exactly what he is going to do to themselves. After all, it was Manson who, in the style of the screens from the newscasts, showed the real cruelty, much more terrible than the cheerful and fun movie violence. So Quentin says, now we're going to apply the healing function of art. Now we're going to experience collective trauma through laughter, and we're going to do to these people what they deserve. It's not enough to kill and ridicule. You have to destroy their own self-concept. They thought they were gods. They made pompous speeches and wanted to instill fear. Tarantino shows these beasts for what they really are. He destroys the solidity of Manson's personality and reminds us that they are just scum, not worthy of admiration, cultural and media significance, or even parodies of them. Tarantino immodestly takes a bow to himself, as if to remind us, yes, this is how I make movies. And it's the same method of healing through art that I've used before. So, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood essentially opens up another dimension to the perception of Inglourious Bastards. But you know, I'll go back to the beginning. It was hard to hold back my tears in the movie theater because none of this had ever happened in real life. While Tarantino was messing with these animals any way he wanted, all I kept thinking about was that it wasn't really like that. Unfortunately, I knew the details of what was going on too well, and I saw Quentin pouring black humor into literally every documented move of that night. A bright, sincere, and fun era of Hollywood died together with Sharon Tate. After that, people will be replaced by visual effects and graphics, and the coolest stuntman, Cliff Booth, will say while being carried off the stage,
"Not time yet, man. All right. It's no use waiting in some waiting room. Why don't you go?"
And Dalton heads into the final segment of the movie, where the tears can no longer be held back. I think that shot and the look on DiCaprio's face make a lot more sense now. It's like he's looking back to the real 60s, to a place where there was no Polanski fence, unfortunately. The ghostly voice of Sharon Tate comes out of a communicator. The fictional great actor Dalton gets the privilege, so desired from the beginning of the movie, to meet the Polanski family, completing his plot, and goes to them. Up there. Notice that the camera doesn't follow him, doesn't show faces or emotions, and doesn't enter the apartment. We're looking at this Hollywood happy ending from the outside, from afar. We let go of both the characters and the real story. We as viewers get justice. Everything can be resolved the way we want it to be resolved, at least in our imagination. Only here, the name of the movie is revealed in full. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Unfortunately, they showed us just a fairy tale, but real life is different. I have nothing more to say about the movie, but please support the video by liking it. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next review. and write something in the comments section where we can discuss this movie masterpiece together. And we'll see you soon.